นุภาเวนัสนาโสทิภวันตุเตภวตุสาปมังตุสัมบันเดวตาสัมบัสสังฆานุภาเวนัสนาโสภวันตุเตภวตุสาปมังราคันตุสัมบันเดวตาสัมบัสสังฆานุภาเวนัสนาโสทิภวันตุเต
ถัดไปนะคะเรามาดูลำดับกันบ้างดีกว่า
또 술에.
근데 이제 스리랑카 구쇼즈 이거 거리 이네 콘스 페지 딱딱 좀이었어 말이야.
추소 못 줄서 있어.
이 간다 세력민국 간다 타일랜드 제일 스리랑카 지유.
송설세.
나 스리랑카 간다 이제 네버다.
ศรีลังกาสอง
간다 신의 정부도 스리랑카.
Namo tassa bhagavato samma sambuddhassa namo tassa bhagavato samma sambuddhassa namo tassa Sambuddhassa so bhagavaya samma sambuddho vidyāna sampanno sugato paripuranutaro purisarāmpasāti sattva deva manussā buddho bhagavati mākāto bhagavata nammo samtitthivo Bhagavato
A great, thank you. A great sadhu for a short recitation of Pali Sutta chanting by venerable members of the community of Sangha from Thailand and venerable members of the community of Sangha from Asgiriya Temple, Kandy from Sri Lanka. A very good morning to His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all respected venerable members of the community of Sangha from Thailand, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, and many other monastics from various other countries, and many Buddhist friends, Dharma brothers and sisters around the world. Namo Buddhaya, Sapa Mangalang, Tashidale. A very warm welcome to a 2 days teaching program by His Holiness the Dalai Lama on Maha Satipatthana Suttas. Today, 17th of December, 2021, is the first day of teaching program. I'm Dhammapala, a Theravada monk from Malaysia. I'm the moderator for today's teaching program. We are absolutely delighted and honored to be blessed by His Holiness on the teaching of this very important suttas called Maha Satipatthana Suttas. We are very grateful for His Holiness, for His compassionate presence online, teaching the Maha Satipatthana Suttas for the benefits and happiness of many. In Pali, Bahujana Sukhaya, Bahujana Hitaya. The format of this 1 hour teaching program will be mainly the teaching by His Holiness and followed by question and answer from the floor. Indeed, this is the precious moment for us to learn from the great teacher, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. The Buddha says in the Mangala Suttas, associating with the wise is a great blessing. Panditanang cha sevanang etang mangala muttamam. I hope you will make wise use of this wonderful and rare opportunity to ask His Holiness anything about life, meditation, practice, and cultivation. However, due to overwhelming questions from the floor and due to time constraint, we might not be able to attain all of your questions, and your understanding is very much appreciated. Now, we request the floor to mute your mic and keep the video open. Please keep the environment calm and peaceful. Listening attentively to the teaching by the Great Master, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. On behalf of all the organizers, His Holiness, I would like to introduce some of your old friends and senior monks to you. Most Venerable Dr. Waskadue, Mahinda Vangsa, Mahanaka Thero, Mahanaka Thero Sri Lanka of Sri Sambuddha Sasanodaya Sangha Sabha of Amarapura Mahanikaya, Sri Lanka.
Good
Most
morning.
Venerable Niyangoda, Vijita Siri, Anu Nayake Thero, Anu Nayake of Mawalta chapter of Siang Mahanikaya, Sri Lanka. Venerable Dr. Omaupe Sobihita Nakathero, Chief Sankanayaka for Southern Sri Lanka of Sri Ramanya Mahanikaya. Venerable Narang Panawe Ananda Nakathero, Chief Abbot of Asgiriya Maha Pirvena Kandy. Most Venerable Pra Medi Wajirodom, Venerable Vajira Medi, Chentawan International Meditation Center, Thailand. Most Venerable Vajira Yanamuni, or Ajahn Achalo, he is the abbot of the Anandagiri Forest Monastery in Thailand. Venerable Sri Saranankara, Naika Mahathera Chief of Malaysia, Theravada Council, Malaysia. Most Venerable Kemacharo Mahathera, the Chairman of Indonesian Supreme Sangha Councils. Most Venerable Dr. Santacitto Thera, the Chairman of Kerja Rajasa Buddhist College, Indonesia. Most Venerable Dhamma Vudo Thera, the Chairman of Indonesian Buddhist Scholars Fellowship, Indonesia. And the last one, Venerable Dr. Dhammapiya Mahathero, Secretary General, International Buddhist Confederation, India. Without further ado, we shall invite Chief Venerable Bodhi Nandamuni to give a welcome speech. Bodhi Nandamuni is the Chief Abbot of Wat Pa Buddhagaya Temple in Bodh Gaya. Bante, please unmute your mic, please.
Kangri rawe korwe singkamdir. Pendang dewa malu jungwene. Chenre sikwang tensing kasoyi. Sabe site badu tenchurjik. Good morning, Your Holiness. It's my privilege and honor to see you again. Thank you very much for choosing this wonderful, precious teaching, Maha Satipatthana Sutta, which one of the main practice in Theravada countries and co-teaching of Lord Buddha. The Buddha himself says, this is the one and only way to get liberation. This teaching is coordinated by your office in Southeast Asia and organized by Venerable Prabodhinantha Muni Luang Phoi Chiu, Wat Pa Thamachat Meditation Center of Thailand, Sriwijaya State Buddhist College of Tangerang, Indonesia, Theravada Buddhist Council, Malaysia, Sri Lanka Tibetan Buddhist Brotherhood Society, ASEAN Dhammatutta Projects Thailand, Tibetan Buddhist Center Singapore and Sri Lanka. On behalf of all the organizers,
So, now can I start my talk? Okay. Nara namjunity dön de jesu road chongjuxing gawe so la jangba menmenxing nanzhe zhe le zhenbei galongxi changsu chenbu de le tedr ku shen kan dan nirixin du 덤바야 전두산에 왕한테 저런 시간 던져대 책이 시부시 누가 쳐보시도 던져서 로도 중주시 개발소로 장관매매 신스 전된대기 가 되는 숨 에너지 광지 이게 춘주간에 싸울로선 에너지버디 영지 도시 상기 투지거진 뭐这些建设都是呢개발소로 장관매매 신 에네 그래서 토두게 터든 줄을 쉬니 에네 니리신도 다 수중글로 실리샤니 에네 띵지글로 갈 칸섬지 상당히 요래 섬지지보디 상당히 요래 에네 슈샤디 에네 장주섬 상로 동야다 에네 동력이 따와 다티 자신 주주기 장주섬 에네 사무도주기 동력이 따와 에네 라진 주주기 에네 시월에 에네 daksennyamji 로상디디 네 니리신도 상당히 검격이 자상가 던지셔서 개성으로 장본면이 내저 저로 준비 개론 어떤지기 다 말은 두시들이 쉬어요라 다 뒤터네 시 애니 쳐져서야 그래서 투두기 지금 말에다 냠랜드 데니 지금 컨트레지기 다 성려야 지금 유어로 컨트롤 주기 버들 저기 이 쳐져서 님도리야 감시하라 시라 가오예 에네 다 들대 냐란데 창조다 발리기 추진 중에 넘버 7 나한테네 아니 레자기 추진 중에 다 가다 가서 삼월로 전된대기 전장 지규리 아니 지금 또도 잠만을 예버디 전된대 코로나 셰슈베 그도네 아니 그나 지라마 대화적에서로 어디는 용기요래 아니 림베기 아니 간단 도데와 아니 샘잠바 우모바 제제르레 낭세기 야 만다든데 다 용되기 요래 디디 간다 전된대 코랑기 결혼 다감 캐는 게 스시다 스신도 레버다라 나이가 라오르 차이 규치 민세네 전된대 진도 송도가 세상가 난조리야 전된대기 제가 지시서 뭐시나 라와 차상 송 전에 아니 전된대 코랑기 송베 까들이야 전된대기 까르스니 이지셔 말했어 될 당시 시세네 전된대 코랑기 송도가 세상은 말한서 아니 발리기 취지들에 아니 사고도에 나는데 아니 렉자기 취지가 나올라 아니 좀된데 그 까르니를 그렇게 잡아차 시우지다 용돼야지 사들이 이두산에 또 좀된데 그 까리야 지금 그 리뷰 잡아잖아. 이 never dare 슈처처라스 마도 잡아잖아. 애니 슈데 지금 랜자면 전에 애니 대화장장 가는 거지. 저기 말이. 저들이 인도 전된대기 롱도 그 때문에야 신의 대화 토지기. 또 거기에라 또 나라 차샤네 어디 좀 된대기 전장 Any Dacha Lumda, Samuel of Yamboda, and a Dakshan Yamji, Lozon to the Teddy, Nyamlin Jenny. Any Shin at Tawato Jenny to see you. Say any chance of Terichozo to suggest any Hajan Kabuchung. Da that to the name
Argumento.
Chism Shidi. Tati Nalia, Chugu Draman at the Samolo, Tubuyachi. The third Draman already in a Kasur, Sama Sanguchiadi, Chugu Sama Sunguyori. 다른 신기 차고 마셔야 돼. 추주 삼에서 그도가. 아니 무직부 자가기미 제인데 아니 발리 추주 중에 참말로기 간다 잠닝지 냠는시야다 세번 냠는시야 샤나 차와미시야 삼에서 그도가. 아니 자가나야 다래 아니 출루카 디기 차와 미지야서디 쉬울 정도가
주의디.
세상 자가나리야
교라마도
로동자 하거든요. 로동자 니가 하거든요. 차와 미지야다. 아니 그러다 힘사스야가 차와 미지야다. 아니 거루나스야게 참지스야디 로동자 한 순수증을 떠주디 레디기도 봐. 세상가 다 디디 나저 디 라지를 야자가 나로 출루 먼저 망고요래. 카시쉐 요래. 아니 이슈도 아자자. 아니 힌두 자면자 제인 자면자 chen 예버디디 상물로 자가를 투다도보도 맞아 미비다스지 출루 튼지디 미국다서 여도시 레도와 자상가 나데 자갈 센지어 제니 로디디 심벌이 뭐는지 자갈이야 아니 출루 튼지디 아니 차와 메지야다 출루 튼지디 뭐는지 지수이랑 semke tingne pe kasor kya chigi o tedishto santa teride kanzo ada pale ki chujun na bozo da ene leja ki chujun na bozo azu tus tuše da gesha gogo chung hajan kya sang go chung enda na bozo churchlin on nyal des
na juedi ji 그러고 메더나
아니 저질래 인다
말이 이게 주의디 네 다들
내가 가래 어디
So it's a great joy for me to have this opportunity to be with you all, venerable Sangha members, and we are all students of one and the same teacher, Lord Buddha. In my own case, every day, every morning when I get up, I recite a particular stanza which was composed by the 14th century Tibetan master Tsongkhapa. And that stanza, 4-line stanza, captures something that is very dear to my heart and also shows the level of devotion on the part of practitioners like myself towards the Buddha. And the stanza says that having taken the monastic vows as the basis for my practice, and also having engaged in the study of the great teachings of the Buddha and other masters, and then having implemented these, put these into practice through, yogic practices, I have developed this devotion and faith towards you, the great teacher, referring to the Buddha. So this really is a stanza that is very dear to my heart. And also I personally identify with the sentiments expressed in these 4 lines very deeply. I've had the privilege to be able to take the monastic vows when I was very young, and which thus establishing the basis for the foundation morality practice. And then in my own life, I've been privileged to have access to a great teacher, my main principal tutor, Yongzhen Rinpoche, who, thanks to his kindness, I've been able to be exposed to the vast teachings of the Buddha, as well as the great masters that came after the Buddha, and spend enough time, actually not a minimal time, but quite a bit of time, delving deeply into these teachings and the great treatises. And thanks also to having the opportunity to engage deeply in the practice so that I can implement what I have learned. The content of the learning for a Buddhist needs to be put into practice through meditative cultivation. And in my own personal practice, of course, on the basis of morality, one of the important practices is the cultivation of single-pointedness of mind, which is the concentration and shamatha. And because the concentration and the shamatha practice allows us to be able to have some ability to apply our mind in a focused way. So that's really a key part of the practice. And then with that kind of mental technique, the main focus really is, in my own personal case, cultivation of bodhicitta, the altruistic intention to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings, grounded in universal compassion. This is an important teaching coming from what in the Tibetan tradition we call the lineage of the profound, lineage of the vast practices. And then the second focus of my practice is the teaching on shunyata, emptiness, which is really understanding of the deeper nature of reality. And this set of teachings is referred to as teachings coming from the lineage of profound view. And then the third lineage, main focus, is the teachings coming from Shantideva, focused particularly on altruistic intention, equalizing self and others, and exchanging self and others, and expanding one's altruistic orientation of the heart. So these three are my main focus of cultivation. And as a result, as I deepen my own personal practice, the more I am able to gain something from these practices, the deeper my devotion and reverence to the great teacher Buddha becomes. So this is something that I wanted to share with you. And the recollection of the Buddha is something that we as Buddhists must do on a daily basis. And in my own case, that's the first thing in the morning when I do by reciting those verses. So of course, Buddha's, when we talk about the Buddha's teachings and the tradition that came from the Buddha, broadly one can say there is the Pali tradition and there is the Sanskrit tradition. And the Sanskrit tradition is the tradition that really remained and embodied in what came to be known as the Nalanda tradition of the great masters. And the Pali tradition is very well represented in this congregation today. And so when it comes to the philosophical views, we have to admit that there is a diversity of views in the teachings of the Buddha. Even in the history of the Buddhism, we know, for example, there is the emergence of what is called the 18 great schools, from the teachings of the Buddha. And these, each of these schools maintain a slightly different philosophical view. And then within India, if you look at the philosophical history, there is the Vaibhashika, Sutrantika, Chitramatra, mind-only school, and the Madhyamaka. So all of these diverged philosophical views really emerged. And in fact, strictly from a historical point of view, it would make sense because Buddha did not teach just one teaching for everybody. So, and that's why, there is in fact a statement attributed to the Buddha where the Buddha says that just as a goldsmith would test the quality of the gold by rubbing, cutting, and burning, in the same manner, you should examine my statements, the words I have uttered, and accept them on the basis of your understanding, not out of pure devotion. So in some sense, we could say that the Buddha, our teacher, has given us, his followers and disciples, a kind of a liberty, a freedom to really examine and really make sense of the content of his teachings in relation to our own understanding. And it is because of this, their historically, particularly in the Nalanda tradition, there emerged a great diversity of interpretation of the Buddha's teachings, to the point where distinction is drawn between the provisional nature of some of the teachings and the definitive meaning of some of the teachings. And so to the point where sometimes even the literal statement of the Buddha is not accepted on the surface level meaning, but looked at as a deeper underlying hidden meanings and so on. So I think it is really important to understand this overall history, and also to really recognize that as Buddhists, Buddha really was teaching something to us aimed at understanding the nature of reality as it is. So the nature of reality as it is would require us to apply our mind and critical thinking to be able to understand. And so, for each of the statements of the Buddha pertaining to the truth, we can subject them to analysis. So it's not, Buddha's teachings is not something like a scriptural, has to be accepted as a scriptural authority on a, just a pure faith or devotion. Buddha's teaching can be accepted by examining and relating to the nature of reality and reason. So therefore, it's a very rich tradition. And once we are able to understand this, then our devotion and faith to Buddha will not be just purely a devotion and faith, but it will be a devotion and a faith grounded in reason and grounded in understanding. And this is something that I think is really important, and I want to share with my fellow Buddhists, that to be able to cultivate a faith in the Buddha that is grounded in understanding and grounded in reason. So this is something that is important. And of course, today we're living in a very pluralistic world. And in this world, the fact is there is a multiplicity of different spiritual traditions. And all of these spiritual traditions, we have to understand the place of Buddhism in the context of this plurality of world spiritual traditions. And as Buddhists and followers of the Buddha, we need to be able to identify with fellow spiritual practitioners and sometimes, sort of unite in where we can see commonality. For example, when we look at the ethical teachings of all the great spiritual traditions, there is a convergence on emphasis on cultivation of good heart, compassion, and avoidance of harm. So these teachings are universal, and that's why cultivation of a good heart, and for example, cultivation of patience, forgiveness. So these are universal spiritual values, and it's something that we as Buddhists also need to appreciate when we relate to other traditions. And in my own case, I am a deep admirer of the great heritage of the India, the country where I have had the privilege to live now for many years as a refugee, as a stateless person. But India particularly is a place where historically there has been a multiplicity of faith traditions. In addition to Buddhism, there is the Hinduism, various traditions of, denominations of Hinduism. There's, of course, Islam, Christianity, and so on and so forth. So there's many sort of, more than several centuries history of the plurality of faith traditions in India. And because of this, India has been able to really promote this idea of plurality, acceptance of the plurality of spiritual traditions. And this is something that I deeply admire. So the two things that I really try to share in the world taken from the Indian heritage, one is the emphasis on ahimsa, the nonviolence and avoidance of harm, rooted in compassion. And then the second one is, an explicit adoption of plurality of faith traditions. So these are two important heritage of India, which I really try to share more widely. So before we launch into the actual teaching, once again, I want to express my deep gratitude to everyone who has made this organize this teaching. And also as myself, a monastic member, it's a real privilege and joy to be able to be with many fellow monastics today here for this session. Thank you.
Any Darish at the Tisamtangiori, Tedalo second hour session, Rangalana, never Juru Russian. Susan did a Molu, then a Kemevar, Tode, Tanya Tempeto, Gogonjo, Taton Goporto, something Yimigi, Draw Gumibala, Nijan, Kevshi. Tegon, Tishi Suji Sanjan, Dijani, Molubon, Loy, Papa Chivani, Kuzutini, Shoyanga, Gayo, Namboy, Tenekio, Namboy, Dududaneke, Lungu, Shudo, Gay, and the Jazu Power shot on draws. Odangadi, Gay and the Jazu Power, Yatos and Dragi. It's all she or it. Pleasure, Tommy, she, a lamner, pleasure, Simgi, so she do. So any go Shundi sick Jizam Maimba. So Lalik and Yundi, one at Chanegi, da so the Gasha Lum the sim dinging never told the churchy, slowly Jodo de Aji, Yugudua. Just all any Guzu the Shayanga would get you, Mangway would then you. Do than a girl, shoot to get and the Jazu Power short and drogan, or the shop was Raya with the Yomar, in a shop of Tepsha, Jigitane, to Drugiori.
So another point I want to share with you is that on my part, given my dedication to personal practice, there's a passage from the 7th century Indian master Chandrakirti. It is entering the middle way towards the end. Concluding part of that text where he talks about how on the basis of cultivation of compassion on the one side and wisdom of emptiness, understanding the nature of reality on the other, wisdom and compassion. And he compares these two to the two wings of a bird that is, flying across the space to, travel towards the other shore, which is the attainment of Buddhahood, liberation. So it's a poetic sort of articulation of the author's aspiration to attain Buddhahood. And on my part, I find these verses very deeply meaningful. And as much as possible, I strive on the path. And one thing that I can say is that, if you make the commitment not to leave what you have learned just as intellectual knowledge of, dharma, but in fact, implement them into your own personal life by relating to your own mindset, own way of thinking, on your own state of mind, then we can really see a transformation, a change in ourselves. And when you are able to see the change in yourself as a result of implementation through practice, then you begin to feel a kind of almost as if you could taste what the texts are talking about, so that it does not remain just words and representation in words, but actually there is a sense of reality that sets in. So I could say that although I cannot claim that I'm actually gone quite far, but I could say that at least I have, touched the first part of the threshold of the path that is going to lead me to the other shore. And so perhaps the two wings that I'm using, the wisdom and compassion, aren't as, strong as I would like them to be, but still there are two working wings that can at least take me a little bit on the path. So the point I'm trying to make is that it is important that the knowledge of Dharma be actually made real through personal practice, so that you begin to see a change within your own mind.
So now some questions.
Chabiti.
Oh. Champanyesha. That day, any.
So we are in the
number 2. dita tukyu yobare. And that day, shiftrama shuka kemindo. And Changzhou Sodun Sadi, Champanyan Sha Shi, Yangda Pong Shi, Zuju Gangbo Shi, Taso Wongbonga, Donga, Changshu Yangla Dun, Palang Yangla Get Sa, or the Changzhou Sodungi, Jordan Didi, go. The Chasanji Kuma do Stigni, Rokwaji, Chuna, and Kwa Chasan Lea Cherisha. 좀 전에 순그 레전식 단자야 주셔는 것이 창조 수준 그 주단에 차상지도 토마 퇴바체 되는 퇴배되는 양의 양도 상 아니 상배된 고민도 전에 태성 공수 야마 저거 전에 이니 리베기 냠용기 냠용되기 아니 로를 조태야지 어다 도수 주고요. 주당 도수지.
So
자상아 되어 canzo shunyin 아니 시간을 쳐서 내수 오내수 내수 뭐니 잡는 시간이 그 그게 직선 셰셔 많이 붙여. 그 간다 유딩의 자니 다 되네니 상다지 제윤도산에 그나 동리기 따와 사기 식지이네 그 냠뇨 영의지 된주기 대코는 슬라이드산에 지코 즉 서버로 차이부터가 그 선나로를 구조돼야지도가 셰 된대기 그게 냠뇨선이 개면은 아니 된주기 대코는 있어도 어디 오모베 아니 통모임에 따와 차대 요리 서브사 요리 사르스마도 디케민도가 자사가 터섬 공수 야마저시도 상당데 다 제가 또 토부인도 쓰기메디 간다 냠뇨 갈라 간서 유튜브지 차대 요리 딘제인도 뭐는 지다 최 산제베 최디 아니 터성 공수 야마저신도 상당비나 뭐나 전에 지 미스다갈 차샤나 존드라 여도보다 애는 서로전에 다 있는 살람 줘야지 가데 파랑가데 파라상고데 부디 소화샤디 뭐네 다 용야지르샤 삼 차이고도.
So on the text, Maha Satipatthana Sutta, this is a text that is very familiar to the Theravada community. And I don't think it would, it would not be necessary for me to be commenting on the specific words or sections of the text itself. One thing that I would like to share with you is that my suggestion would be to, when we look at a great scripture like this, Maha Satipatthana Sutta, for example, which presents the teachings on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, from my own personal kind of experience is that I find it really helpful to not to look at the specific teachings in their own right, in isolation. I always try to look at the great teachings of the Buddha in a broader context, where that specific teaching is coming from and what broader context that teaching is part of. So for example, the 4 foundations of mindfulness is a key practice which is part of a larger context that is the 37 aspects of the path to enlightenment. And the 4 foundations of mindfulness is the first of the 7 sets. So you have the 4 endeavors, 5 faculties, 5 powers, the 4 limbs for concentration practice, and then you have 7 limbs of mindfulness, enlightenment, 7 factors of enlightenment, and 8 for noble path. So it's important to, even in relation to a practice of, say, 4 foundations of mindfulness, to be able to, first of all, understand it in the broader context of the 37 aspects of the path to enlightenment, which really presents the whole map of the path to enlightenment. So that, I think, is really helpful. And the other one is to really make a broader comment about generally what Dharma practice entails. Dharma practice entails, for example, in the case of the 4 foundations of mindfulness and the 37 aspects of the path to enlightenment, the first stage is the stage of learning, where we have to cultivate the understanding of the teaching by studying, by hearing, by reading. So this is the first level of understanding, referred to as understanding derived through study or learning. The second thing is, now based on what we have studied and learned, we need to now contemplate on it constantly. And so this second stage is more like processing what we have studied, what we have learned, internalizing it. And so this second level is referred to as understanding derived through critical reflection or contemplation. So this is the second level. And the third is then whatever we have understood and comprehended and processed, we then need to meditatively cultivate it, reinforce it. So the third level of understanding is the understanding derived through meditation. So in an ideal world, we should not do them one at a time. In an ideal world, we should do them in an integrated manner. So even when you are studying, you keep contemplating upon it and then immediately practice it. So if we are able to approach using the integration of study, contemplation, and meditative cultivation, then we will really begin to see a change. So what happens is that when we are able to use this kind of approach, then automatically we'll be doing this by relating to our own personal experience. So your Dharma practice does not become talking about something out there in the outside world. Your Dharma practice becomes something about your experience, your state of mind. So once you're able to relate the Dharma teachings from your own state of mind, then we really begin to see a deepening of our own conviction and ascertainment. And through understanding, conviction, and ascertainment, reinforced through constant cultivation, then we really begin to see a change in ourselves. So this is something that I, as an elder member of the Sangha who has done some practice, can share with you, or from my own personal experience, that through this kind of approach, we can really see a change in ourselves, in our mind.
Long. China, Kanda Chanju Sam, Gunduzane, so Juju.
Sorry, I forgot something. Let's chess.
Jiten Tungichi, you take a random delegation. Jiten Dawachi, you shan't take a shanton delegation. Dr. Shenji Tunga, the Yanda or Machana, Sanja you to Midu Koana, Dawame. Te young Gunse, Chanju Sim Dashane, then Dawa and Roll, some sushi, Kilu, you say, Oda, Junju City, never show Shushua. Netting in there is some Dante. Shushu Shushto.
So,
the Ranashiki Tungni, Diaqualia, Kandus, let's see this triangle. Kandus, Chivanum, Transition, Dansheva, Tini Kala, Trava, Chawmoli Chivago. Then the Shadow Modern, Dabashi, Wajer and the Sankishin, Mudishana, Chambu 6, and other song shadi, May and Kolan Dardi, and Nasadi, the Kanda Chada Jessa, Zor de Masa de Roda, and Nadi Namdungi do say into Sane, Nachun near Medevjigi. Cha Yundu, Chechen, any Chada Jay, Shishing a co, any Tatun Sana, Niki Medevitel, Lia, never Tabia Chile, go Pinkitua. Oh, Chesanga. 나가서 따와 가서 전대야디 그 처지네 차상패야지 저기 요래 처지네 남든 거거든 남의 이거 줄을 도지 생매든지 애는 뭐를 줘 직주 차지 된지 저불을 줘 예매 경고 그 된지 된지도 상담도잖아 나서야지 켜는 이해하면되지 차용도가 자상가 대네 제 나서야지 그 처지네 그 너쟁을 차 처지네 그 동력이 따와서 화야기 그게 힘으로 차용했지 대상 아니 나를 상담이 도스
So, sorry, earlier I forgot something. So, to conclude, His Holiness was saying that when we are able to truly gain something as a result of our own personal experience, then even when the specific words related to a particular teaching is heard, you have a different kind of feeling when you hear the words. For example, say when we talk about the dependent origination, pratitha samuppada, or for the Tibetan Buddhist, the teaching on emptiness. So when you hear the word dependent origination, pratitha samuppada, if you don't have a deeper practice, then the words just remain words. And then maybe you will have some intellectual understanding that it is an important part of Buddhist teaching or Buddhist philosophy. But beyond that, there is no real emotion on your part. Whereas if you have done some serious practice yourself, then even when you hear the word, like pratitha samuppada or shunyata, the word will have a qualitatively different sensibility for you. The word becomes rich, the word becomes pregnant, word becomes poignant. So there is a kind of your relationship with the word also changes. So to continue, alongside my own other practices, as I mentioned before, I'm also a great admirer of the 8th century Indian Buddhist master Shantideva. And Shantideva's teaching, particularly on cultivation of our heart, moving towards a more altruistic orientation, is a powerful one. And there are passages, for example, he says that if one is not able to exchange at a deep level, self and others, let alone attainment of Buddhahood, even in this life, there will be no happiness, no real happiness. So then he says about, therefore, by overcoming any sense of weariness, one should ride this horse of altruistic intention and travel from one place of joy to another place of joy. What intelligent person wouldn't want to embark on such a journey? So those are really powerful words. He's really kind of conveying, and this is really, I find these words very powerful and try to sort of implement them in my own life. And similarly, for example, when in relation to the teaching on shunyata, emptiness, there is a passage in Tsongkhapa's line where he talks about how dependent origination is for the unenlightened and ignorant. It's the doorway through which we go to the lower realms, because we get attached, we grasp at it, and then we create negative karma and so on. But for the wise, the truth of dependent origination opens the door to liberation. So this is a very important passage. But for me, I use it slightly in a different way. For example, I try to bring up the notion of an I, and we all know that the thought I am, this aham kara, the thought I am is often the basis of many of the problems. This grasping at I, the grasping at self, is the basis of many of the negative emotions that arises. And then, I leads to, self-centeredness, which leads to grasping, which leads to kind of attachment and so on. But at the same time, the same notion of I can be used in a constructive way for a practitioner by examining the nature of it, by engaging into a critical inquiry. For example, in Chandrakirti's text, he uses what is called the sevenfold analysis of the self, whether the self is identical with the aggregates, whether the self is person is distinct from the aggregates, whether the self resides in the aggregates, whether the aggregates possess the self, whether it is the configuration of the aggregates, or whether it is the collection of the aggregates. So there's a sevenfold analysis. So when you apply the sevenfold analysis and search what exactly is this I that I'm referring to when I think of, that I'm thinking of, we will discover that it is unfindable. When subject to such critical analysis through a sevenfold mode of analysis, we don't find self beyond our constitutive elements that make up our existence. So in this way, even though the notion of self can lead to problem by attachment, grasping, and so on, but at the same time, the fact that we have a natural sense of self allows us an opportunity to use it in a constructive way by applying critical inquiry and wisdom prajna, and discovering that there is no real basis for this strong attachment that we bring about. So in this way, the point is that the teachings of the Buddha and the Dharma teachings are not something external to our experience. The teachings are something that are relevant to our experience, and by applying it to our own states of mind and mind experience, we'll be able to gain a real change.
Now some questions.
We are indeed rejoiced at the teaching by His Holiness. And this is indeed a blessed teaching program to have the great teacher, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to teach us this direct path to realization through the teaching of Maha Satipatthana Sutta. As His Holiness said, though we live in a multiplicity of Buddhist traditions and teachings, but the faith and devotion to the Buddhas, the cultivation of compassion and wisdom remains applicable to all Buddhist practitioners for the ultimate realization of Nibbana. For your information, His Holiness will continue delivering the same teaching on Maha Satipatthana Suttas tomorrow, the same time, Indian time, from 8 to 9 a.m. We have many questions from monastic as well as laity to ask His Holiness. But due to time constraint, we can only take a few questions, and your understanding is very much appreciated. This is a gentle reminder for questioners. When you ask the question, please unmute the mic. And after questioning, remember to mute the mic back, but keep the video open. And we shall keep the room calm and peaceful and create a conducive learning atmosphere. We may now invite Venerable Maha Sokchai Kunivat from Thailand to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
May I pay respect to Your Holiness and good morning, all Dhamma friends. I would like to ask some question. The Buddha says Satipatthana is the direct way for purification of beings, for overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for extinguishing of suffering and grief, for walking on the path of truth, and for realization of Nibbana. But in the present time, the new generation just need for overcoming trouble in their life. So how can we apply Maha Satipatthana Sutta to use in daily life, such as in situation of COVID-19? Thank you.
주전 게 가제 이버들이 삼로서 고고 말봐. 커두기 지 강에 채베 커두로 다지 강에 먹고지 미지소 나올 채되지. 아니 미밀이야 지 콘두사야 서로 차도라야 서로 나제지야 서로를 연대기도 와 다디도 또서 동 rindu 파다네 그다 디두 사디 소스 아니 레지 왕기 요구여 왔다 레스야데 심 뒤모디고 타네 요구여 디리가 상로 망스 코레이나 아니 시 강에 체디 다가는 밀 주고 딱 레라베 토알 밀 주고 돼야 디디 패시 연구 말에 사디리 인도 가당 알아서 안돼 되지데 시 다산지게 처리야 딘딘 동네하고 대보 딘딘 구주하고 대보 딘딘 고모하고 대보 딘딘 람하고 대보 신이 den시송돼야 디디기 도시 den시 고는 대보 차와는 대보 차와 대부도 잡을 대보사 대수체도 도 상도스 예배이나 에네 아주 강에 제주잖아요 지금 남상 시스템이야 공주사가 서로 지금 심심이하고 서로 어디도 배치 매용을 해서 쉬우켜도.
So this is your question is very true because for most people, in their day-to-day life, when they encounter difficulties such as adverse situation, tragedy, and so on and so forth, very rarely people are able to, create the space to actually understand what are the causes and conditions behind the situation. People tend to choose an easy path, which is to immediately blame others and latch on to whatever conditions they think is responsible. And because many of the problems arise as part of our being in a society, our tendency would be immediately to blame someone else. And so here, there's a kind of for a lot of people, there's a natural tendency to immediately react and choose a shortcut and try to find someone to blame your problem at. So the through practices such as through the Satipatthana teachings and more broadly the teachings on the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha has given, it can really make a difference, because one of the things that the Buddha's teaching in these texts, scriptures tell us is the importance of contemplation, to observe, to reflect, so that you don't immediately react in an impulsive way. So when you observe and contemplate in a deeper way, you really begin to see the causes and conditions that are part of it. So that's why, for example, one of the basic teachings of the Buddha is that to a large extent, our suffering and happiness is a function of our state of mind. And to an extent, there's the karmic function of karma involved, but most importantly, our own suffering and happiness is determined by or influenced deeply by the state of mind we have. If we are able to create a more peaceful state of mind, it creates a space for joy and resilience and able to deal with difficult situations. But if our state of mind is disturbed and undisciplined, agitated, then it leads to more problem. So the state of mind, the happiness and suffering to a large extent is a consequence and function of our state of mind. So by paying attention, creating the space, it really makes a big difference. And here, the most important teachings for the Buddhist, from this broader perspective, is to cultivate an outlook that deeply takes into account the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha said, this is the truth of suffering. This is the truth of the origin of suffering. This is the truth of the cessation of suffering. And this is the truth of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. So in this, there is the most important teaching is the teaching on cause and effects, and encompassed in the Four Noble Truths. So when we are able to, deeply reflect and integrate these teachings, then we will be able to create a sort of an outlook, a state of mind, and an approach where we will not react in a kind of a immediately reactive manner. And when we are encountering a suffering or a tragedy, we wouldn't respond as if we are shocked that, how can this happen to me kind of thing. So we would not respond in this way because we will be able to have a deeper understanding of the situation. So in this way, I think the Buddha's teaching can really help to create a more open, spacious, resilient mind so that one can be able to deal with immediate challenges in a more constructive way.
산지선데 담바시스 동에다 뭐 구조다 뭐 고고다 뭐 남지 담바스니 송샤 지주자기 또서 거를 쉬베이나 애는 가서 다대변은 내양 그 서로 들어가게 되고 그들이 그 섬나로 다 교도见了 때네 난기 규진 치 규진 망구수수 연구여서 사무고도 남사지 섬을 빼야지 해로 토르대야지 배지 용말 봐.
So
다 들어가게 되고 그들이야 자본이 시작은 치들지 말라고는 어떤 천을 들으셔야 쓰니 샤샤가 리기요래 그 시제 거야 오지 마잖아.
So if we are truly able to,
so if we if we are able to, as I said before, really kind of internalize the teachings, the significance of the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, then we begin to appreciate the complexity of causes and conditions behind many factors. So, for example, in the case of COVID situation, for someone who has this ability to appreciate the complex causes and conditions, then such a person would not react to the immediate threat in a very shocking way, because one will have the understanding there are internal causes and external causes and conditions, and then one will seek the necessary avoidance that is important part of protecting oneself, and then not emotionally react in a negative way to challenges, so that one can continue to maintain their own peace of mind. If on the other hand, if someone has not internalized these teachings on the cause and effect, like as in the Four Noble Truths, then even if we ask that person to recite part of a holy scripture, like say, for example, from the Satipatthana Sutta, then that person, because the mind is agitated, will not really benefit even from hearing an important part of a passage as well. So this, I personally feel that the teachings embodied in the Four Noble Truths is a truly, truly profound one and an important one. Thank you. The next question.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. And His Holiness was saying that, one of the beautiful things about teachings on Four Noble Truths is that although it begins with the truth of suffering and the origin of suffering, which is the story of the problem, but it's not meant there for us to become discouraged and demoralized, because it's followed by the third noble truth, which is the truth of cessation. And then the truth of cessation shows us the possibility of a freedom, and that is a source of really great hope. And when we are able to understand that there is a possibility of cessation, then the interest arises in finding out what is the path that leads to the cessation. So the psychology behind the Four Noble Truths teaching is a beautiful one.
Okay, so thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable Dr. Maha Sompong Santachito from Thailand to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Good morning, Your Holiness and friend in the Dharma. Your Holiness, as we know, Buddhism has several traditions, and the emphasis is also differently placed. How do we interpret Maha Satipatthana to the modern peoples? And non-religious believers. Thank you.
산제베 최버식인 거네. 근데 삼다나 그 전된대기 아니電子 청고다 아니 발버 천님의 청고다 아니 레고 넘버 7 청고사 되게 전된대기가 다쳐보지요래 드즈제 도즈 로종셰 기유로 도즈여나 아니 나란조다 남바 나자즈 시 샤무 추시 담마다 시 돌로 담마들 되게 삼그토네 에네 되게 추유다 천주 추유사들에 쉬야게 돼요 말이 전된대기電子的 삼배 최송셔버 디디 거로지 바 거르지베이나 에네 최대 면적을 시라시라디 만주주다 아니 천주주사 야와차 매대버시겠다 산제베 처바 나자르다다 어디지 다 델레야 아니 참반예샤가데 어디 드나데 녜디 통데야 지디 결론다 강시 참반 야와를 샤고 시운데다니 심전 남버 타버쳐 냥에다 맹안도 못남 시버셔 동에다 이 메데와노 야워셔 담보 토셔 냥데 뭐도 쳐버쳐 네 탐지기 쳐도 저버지고 라미노스 천대 dom쳐부 숨도 와. 다 간다 지 좀된데기 출루 사월로 그 주더 제비 남이 돈의 순주자네 에 도균이체 아니 고람니체 대시 소야디 쇼준 넘쳐버리셔.
So for us, of course, you're right that among the followers of the Buddha, there are many different traditions. For example, when we talk about the Buddha's turning of the wheel of Dharma, some traditions speak about 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. The first turning of the wheel of Dharma, which is focused on the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. Second turning of the wheel of Dharma, where the key sutras were the perfection of wisdom teachings, primarily focused on emptiness. And then the third turning is the turning that involves sort of further interpretation of the second turning. So there's definitely a diversity among the followers of the Buddha's teaching. But as I mentioned before, the main framework of the Buddha's teaching is really enshrined in the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. That is really the basic framework of the Buddha's teaching. So once we are on our part, whatever traditions we may belong to, if we are able to deeply appreciate the significance and the profound meaning of the Four Noble Truths, then we will be able to really relate to other fellow Buddhist traditions as well, without feeling any strong partisanship, differences that may be based on different color of hat or different colors of robes that one tradition may be adopting, but we'll be able to feel a sense of affinity across all the followers of the Buddha's teaching. So that, I think, is an important one. And I keep saying that the Four Noble Truths teaching is a foundational and the main frame. And here, for example, in the Satipatthana Sutta, Buddha presents a very, a comprehensive summary of the efficacy of the path. When he says, here monks, there is amongst in this one way to the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and distress, for the disappearance of pain and sadness, for the gaining of the right path, and for the realization of Nibbana. So in this, single passage, Buddha really sums up the heart of what the path, Dharma, is supposed to lead us to. And that really is the essence of the practice of Dharma. The aim of the goal of Dharma and the practice of Dharma. And the Four Noble Truths offers us really a powerful framework, because suffering and origin are the one set of cause and effect, and cessation and path are another set of cause and effect. And in these two sets of cause and effect, there is a very, very comprehensive and a grand synthesis of the entirety of the Dharma there.
Yeah. Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable Maha Navin Arunrat from Thailand to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Good morning. Respect to the laws of Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. Respect to His Holiness and all Dhamma friends. Today, I would like to ask His Holiness, what is different between Maha Satipatthana Sutta in Theravada and Mahayana? Thank you so much.
对我常故说人我举没他，给你的带汤没用了，哎呢，心就什么用？实际上个，哎呢，我不是对着的 I don't know, sorry.
So to be honest, because the Maha Satipatthana Sutta was originally not translated into Tibetan, I have not had the chance to read it. So, I have to say that there's no, I haven't been able to compare. So my only response is, I don't know.
Okay. Now
Thank
next.
you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable Narangoda Paluwe Dhammadina Thero from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
අතිපූජනීය දලයි ලාමා නායක මාහිමිපාණන් වහන්සේ ප්‍රධාන විත්වත් සම්භාවනීය සභාවෙන් අවසරයි සුබෝදෑසනක් වේවා පෙර සතිපට්ඨානයේ පිළිබඳ වූ දැනුම මත මලගෙදරකදී පවා ඒ භාවිතයට ගත්තා වර්තමානයේ ඒ ගිලිහීමට හේතු මොනවාද? පෙරවන් සරණයි ස්තුතියි.
记得没装备可多了呀，反正都这半年下手了嘛，这断不赢呢，哎呢，现在这个产断用个要了，哎呢，商业被去个看到这个区域门过去断用的，这上个我看到代表南西普西对吧？有的不赢呢，就扩大这个判断单的要的。 And in that one, Chimbe, she Kasure, the Kim Zang Mizuda, she and the Chobu Transit, do it sick to cover in a young some non doors, she average, then the Panda Yori.
So definitely the practice of chanting suttas, sacred sutras like Maha Satipatthana Sutta as part of the funeral rite can be very beneficial. For example, in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, there is the concept of intermediate state, Andhra Bhavana. And during the intermediate state, the deceased, there is a chance that when family members, the loved ones, are thinking about the deceased and dedicated to the deceased well-being, a sutta is cited. And especially a great sutra like the Maha Satipatthana Sutta, will contain a lot of references to the Blessed One, our teacher Buddha, as well as many precious words from the sacred scripture. So there is a chance, there is a likelihood that the deceased consciousness, which may be there before connecting with the rebirth, has a chance to hear. And then more immediately, it will give an opportunity for the grieving family to be able to find some peace because the focus will be on listening to the chanting of the sutta and being able to even pay some attention in the moment of grief to teachings like the Satipatthana Sutta will have a real immediate impact of creating some peace and comfort for the grieving family as well. So I think it is a really a good practice.
Siva Shisani, Mundu Gisiva, any Percy.
Chisi.
Enkare.
Chisi. Siva.
Oh.
Siva. Jolema.
Oh. Chene Oda, any Kanda number Shiva Sadi, ko Sujile, Sule, ko Yamare, Kora number Shiva Sadi, Kora Ngomukanda Kanine, Kora Yeling Juji Kuyorwa. So Yelins Luzana Kora Riktumbe Juji. Chasanga Shiva says some Riksum Digi Yeling Judi, Kora Riktumbe Jutan Ramado, Lundi, any Shiva. She Kongan Shiva Dramatia, Judichi or day, Yilu number Shiva D, Kora Yilu Gun Koratin Yongo Achigi. The day in the Tane, Anzu Mishiva Sholia, Persisiadi, Ko Yonde Yore. And the day, Kana Pungunibadi, Pachi, Pardu Siva Sunding, Pungunibadi, Toya Pachi, Yeleva. Any the Chonjong Digi, she Dashu Sunday to Stabina, any Percy Digi, Koyada, Toya Udavajiki, Pando Udavajiki, the
So in the Sarvastivada Abhidhamma, there is an explanation of the four aspects or four stages of existence. One is the birth, the second one is the life in between, and the third one is the death, and the fourth one is intermediate state. The intermediate state is the stage in between two rebirths, two births. Underlying this concept of four stages of existence is the understanding that fundamentally human consciousness, the consciousness and body are two separate streams that make up our existence. Human existence is composed of body and mind, but body and mind are two fundamentally different streams of continuity of existence. So when a body ceases, when someone dies, the body ceases, but not the consciousness, because the continuity of the consciousness is rooted upon the successive continuation of the same kind. And this is part of the Buddhist causation theory, where only like things can produce like things. So matter cannot produce consciousness, and consciousness cannot produce matter, even though they can be cooperative conditions with each other. For example, for human mind, aspects of our sensory experiences that are contingent upon physical organs may have some immediate connection to the body, but the deeper manas, the mental level consciousness, is independent of the body. So the continuity of that will carry on. So after the person is deceased, even though the continuity of the body, the consciousness in the body has ceased, but consciousness before taking rebirth, before connecting to a new birth, is still present. So that's one of the reasons why when chantings of sutta and sacred texts are done in the memory and for the dedication of the deceased, there is the possibility that the deceased consciousness can actually have some ability to hear. And there are also suggestions that in some cases, the deceased consciousness can also see, perceive their own old body and being there. So in any case, these kind of practices as part of a funeral rite is actually very beneficial.
Then a Percy da draw of Jiggy, Milum Lu Sash. 아주 능지 면은 다음에 그도로 지금 미진 가셔 뒤에 잡아들여 말다고 그 정신이 땅에 박사된 제 인지로 밀는 걸로 풍부히 원래 고소 로스 쳐야 되는데 영되기도 가 내 모습을 된지 어디 밀는 걸로 아니 풍부히 원래 봐 로스 쳐네 아니 야 뒤 예용기 정보 침투도 가르치기면서 제 밀는 걸로 이게 통돼야 되는데 대중의 모습을 된지 그 시야죠 재산값은 벌써 서로지 밀는 걸로 있어야 돼 도스코 술도 봐 트는체 어디는 신밀는 걸류디 그 풍부히 멀리 봐 아니 로스 체니 그저되게 열어 어디를
So the concept of this intermediate state can be understood by way of an example of a phenomenon that is not that uncommon. And this phenomenon is what is referred to as the dream body. So there are a few individuals, it's not necessarily a consequence of some yogic high practice, advanced practice. For some individuals, it can happen naturally. But there are instances where individuals are able to maintain awareness by adopting a dream body. And they have this unique phenomenological experience of being able to actually observe things around in a dream body. And then later reported. So what is happening in the intermediate state is somewhat similar to this phenomenon of a dream body. And
정신기야 가셔 다 뭐면 박자 얘기를 야 밀는 걸로 수도 정해 되는지 용기요래 양 안에서 곰점네 밀는 걸로 수도 쳐야 되는데 세상에 정우전이 아니 밀는 걸로 파 수도 풍부히 닝벌을 로스 파체네 로봇은 통말로 세상에 밀는 걸로 손나 소바치야 약수도 배제 들으셨어 어떻게
So these phenomena in the cases where it naturally happens are not really a result of some advanced practice. Some people are able to do it, and then they report their phenomenological experience. But there are also practices which actually are called dream yoga, and the dream yoga, through dream yoga, some advanced yogis can actually consciously assume dream body and then actually have the phenomenon and the experience of that phenomena. So because of this, and I do know one or two individuals who actually have that capacity. So, and I was, sometimes I joke saying that if someone can have that ability to adopt dream body, then this could be a very powerful way of, becoming a spy, because people, other than oneself, others cannot observe that dream body. It's very subjective and internal. So the person can still, being able to travel around. So it's the best form of spy could be someone who has that capacity of assuming dream body.
Now next, that's how we know. Now next question.
Thank you, His Holiness. We still remain two more questions. So we now invite Venerable Indu Ragari Vipasitero from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Dalai Lama Maha Swamin Wahanse ඇතුළු සම්භාවනීය මහා සංඝරත්නයන් මගේ ප්‍රශ්නේ තමයි ආනාපාන සති භාවනාව සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම වඩනකොට සතිපට්ඨානය වැඩෙනවද එසේනම් කොහොමද ආනාපාන සති භාවනාවෙන් සතර සතිපට්ඨානය වැඩෙන විදිහ පොඩ්ඩක් පැහැදිලි කරලා දෙන්න.
저선 거 중국 마시아 인도산에 지용으로 걸어야 애는 전번이샤시 애는 류 전번이샤 섬 전번이샤 아니 최 전번이샤 아니 가서
초 전번이샤
초 전번이샤스네 고 전번이샤 시스네 남샤든지 수용 그 요래 아니 대나에다 우 전번이샤 아니 다 되게 안 되셔야들이 그때기 전번이샤 누구로도 처로 심어이나 아니 가서서네 심 전번이샤 슈로 처로 심어이나 아니 풍부히 원래 고소로스 취하든지 용식으로 들으시죠? 그 정도 취하시지?
So the four foundations of mindfulness is a very well-known teaching where the cultivation of mindfulness is applied to four specific objects. These are body, feeling, mind, and mental objects or mind objects. So that's the broad teachings of cultivation of mindfulness, and mindfulness of breathing is part of that. And so in the four foundations of mindfulness, what we see is a progressively movement from body, feeling, mind, and mental objects. So once one is able to deepen the ability to place one's mind and abide mindfully, beginning with body and so on, and especially in the context of in relation to mind, taking the third object, then one will be able to gain mastery over one's states of mind as well. To the point, some of these yogic abilities could be achieved as well, such as dream yoga.
더 슝네 세르랑게 야마레 나가 슝네 애니 시바 차라 먹고시 숨고도가 산다딩 안서 치오에서 거리야 용야게 낭지 토스 세디 지tum으로지 니쿠 거도를 연구요래 대가서 뭐쳐 퇴야지 쟤네 애니 치오에서도 니유에서서네 들 숨고도가
So it's, although it is not that explicit in the sutta teachings with relation to the nature of mind, although there is the application of mindfulness on mind, but it is in the Vajrayana teachings we see more detailed and explicit explanations about the different levels of subtlety of mind and subtlety of consciousness, and this is In this context, we also speak of the consciousness during the waking state, consciousness during the sleeping state, dream states, and so on. Progressively, the sleeping state is subtler than the waking state, and dreaming state is subtler than the waking state, and deep sleep state is subtler than the dreaming state. So, and in this context, there is a reference to a pure luminosity, luminous nature of the mind, and the subtlemost luminous state arises at the point of death. So there are specific techniques and practices in the Vajrayana teachings where yogi cultivates to attain these deeper states of consciousness and deliberately cultivate this luminous or clear light state of mind.
아니 나가 슝드스 나로래 세우도가 사쇼로팀 춘메로팀 메롱로팀 루남셰로팀 남신 난가로팀 수도잖아 애니 동보시디 샤용구요래 사다디 태윈도잖아 미규도 도도 카나메시도 사게 나와든데 차용하지 애니 배나 어디 슈고다 샤바라보디를 파 팀차를 제라 애니 뉴을 해지지 왜서 처음부터 간래연도 애니 나와 쉐바 토바니 토사게 또디 애니 가소래 탐지도 뭐 세샤야 그 공리야 어디 난지 토섬 사디 샤지 용기여라 다 나는 성으로 시골이 애니 and Jordan to those you in any chew second you could do and now chewa now nyato any or did to show do sabachiki motion bachiki. That the motrial need you as a similar diggy any ko to munju John House or Chati. What did it?
So in these teachings, the Vajrayana teachings, we also see descriptions of the different stages of the dissolution that happens, particularly at the point of death. So these the 4 stages of the dissolution of the body, the 4 elements: earth, water, fire, wind. And then finally the wind dissolves into consciousness and consciousness into space. And these, the last stage of the dissolution, so each of these stages of dissolution are correlated with external and internal signs that the person will experience. And especially the final stage of dissolution, where consciousness dissolves into space, there are furthermore 4 levels of 4 stages referred to as the appearance, increased appearance, attainment, and clear light. So we are progressively now dissolving into a subtler state and so on. So the final stage is the clear light of death. So, and this is what the yogi is training. And of course, all of us will one day have to go, and we will be confronted with the experience of death. So for the yogi, the opportunity is to cultivate awareness so that when the person, yogi, is going through the different stages of dissolution, one is able to recognize, now I'm at this stage, now I'm at this stage. And to be able to maintain awareness in the naturally occurring dissolution processes, what is needed is to train ourselves. And the dream yoga is a way of training. And part of that in our training involves, first of all, being able to cultivate lucid dreaming so that you recognize dream as dreams. And so the dream yoga, dream stage, provides us an opportunity to cultivate that kind of recognition of the different levels of subtlety of consciousness.
Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. So this is the last question. We now invite Venerable Bhadra Budi from Indonesia to ask your questions to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Thank you so much for the chance. I respect to His Holiness, all venerables and participants that I really respect. I was very happy when listening the material about Satipatthana explained. But I have a unique question. What is the best way to train Satipatthana in our daily life as monks and members of Sangha itself? Thank you.
Tadi, rengi kelongi samba, dindri kita, porque champa di melum sunjeliya, porque gyundendu, pe shuk shambo che teha shumbo ina, melum sunjeliya, kanda chi, chigi pamlagi nyeba mako yage. Oda digi tanda yorwa, ka di gyundene, nga kelongi samba di, 세두기 내가 저도 마세베 니두기 내가 에네 그 디거로도 고마주나 수고 벌쓰기 내가래 마켈론이 사버디 다 갤론다 패시다 그 간다 풍부 디파 시사를 제일 시야도야 가고르디 얘네 수순 두시르디 마켈론이 사ben 두시디 레토그로 어디르리샤.
So for the monastic members, one of the most important practice is to really constantly cultivate the mindful awareness of the thought that I'm a bhikshu, I'm a monk. And this awareness, this mindful awareness of yourself as a bhikshu and your strong identification with that is really helpful, so that not only during the waking moments of your life, that mindfulness of yourself as a bhikshu will serve as the broader context in which you engage in your everyday activity, but you should cultivate to a point where even in your dream, when you are dreaming something tempting, the thought mindfulness will arise. No, I'm a monk. I'm a bhikshu. So if you are able to really cultivate your awareness and mindfulness of yourself as a bhikshu at that level, that will really help bringing mindfulness into many aspects of your everyday life. And then His Holiness was saying that, if that awareness is very strong, one may even be able to bring it into the intermediate state as well, even though there is no physical body. So in a technical sense, you're not a bhikshu anymore, but still that awareness that I'm a monk will be a powerful one.
소다기 베나니제 나라니 아니 셀러 레버템보 아니 후 가서 어제니 셀러 때 bakısında 제가 하던 뒤에 나라 지 4년 지금 좀도 거두이니 지금도 전시돼야지 송구도가 어딘지 저리샤.
So for example,
두수로서 나방아 눈에 다들 제방아 애네 가서 가다 수다의 예제기 로다
So
뒤준데네 전시도 돼야지 도가.
So if you look at the precepts that make up the monastic vows of a fully ordained bhikshu, we will see that many of the secondary precepts are connected with our everyday behavior, everyday conduct of sleeping, walking, eating, and resting, and so on and so forth. So we don't want to go into the details of the exact precepts specific to what kind of action we are, but the point is there are these precepts. And what this is suggesting is the importance of maintaining mindful awareness throughout your daily activities. For example, we speak of 4 main kind of activities: sleeping, walking, eating, and and then resting. So these 4 main activities, we are advised to bring both mindfulness as well as meta-awareness, or clear knowing, as it is translated sometimes, but meta-awareness, so that you bring mindfulness where you are maintaining your awareness, but there is also a secondary level of meta-awareness, so that you are able to monitor your own behavior. So this combination of mindfulness and clear knowing, or meta-awareness, is something that needs to be brought into everyday behavior and intention and thought. And that's one of the reasons why the monastic vows are so detailed. There are specific precepts pertaining to specific aspects of our activity. And what this emphasis shows us is the important role mindfulness and samprajnana, the clear awareness, really plays in our everyday life.
Okay, next.
Thank you. Thank you.
His Holiness, we have come to an end of our Day 1 teaching program by His Holiness. Indeed, we have a wonderful and fruitful day for listening to the Dharma talk at the right time and associating with the wise, the great teacher, and more importantly, irrespective of traditions and lineage and background that we are all coming from, His Holiness has shown us his living of an exemplary spiritual life, motivating us to walk the path of full realization. So let us join palm together to express our gratitude to the great masters, His Holiness, and of course, all audience worldwide online, and rejoice by saying 3 times in the Buddha's own word, Sadhu, Sadhu, Sadhu. So see you tomorrow, the same time. Sabbe sattva sukhita hontu. May all beings be well and happy.